Good evening. I'm Gary Ingram, new superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park, and I'm very thankful that you are here to join us today as we seek your input on the day use visitor access plan and environmental assessment at Rocky Mountain National Park. The goal of this meeting tonight is to orient you to the plan and EA components, answer any questions you have that will help inform our comments or your public comments, excuse me, and share how to participate in this process. I'm joined tonight by my fellow co-workers. That's Kyle Patterson, who's the Public Affairs Officer and Management Specialist of Rocky Mountain National Park, John Hannon, who's the Management Specialist in charge of business programs at Rocky Mountain National Park, and Dr. Rachel Collins, Project Manager of NPS Visitor Use Management. They've been wonderful to work with as the new superintendent here, and I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Rachel Collins to this program. So thank you again for joining. It means a lot that you are with us. Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us. So grateful to have so many people who are spending their Wednesday evening with us. My name is Rachel. I wanted to orient folks to the program that we have tonight for this virtual public meeting, kind of what to expect, and go over a couple of logistics before we dive into the presentation. We are going to be going over a couple different components of the document that we have out for public review right now, the Day Use Visitor Access Plan and Environmental Assessment. We're going to talk a little bit about just kind of orientation to the process and kind of where we've been and setting some framework for what this plan is all about. Talking a little bit about background and how we got here. We'll also then be discussing the alternatives, what's represented in the document, and helping provide some orientation to the different components, and then diving into how you can participate in this process. And we're so grateful that you're here to start that process with us. We did also want to orient folks who haven't joined us on Teams Live before to what this platform looks like. We are going to be taking questions as a part of this format. So if you're looking for the Q&A, it's up there in the corner, that little question bubble. You can go ahead, pop that open on any time throughout the meeting. We have a team set up in the background that is collecting questions. They are organizing them in the background into themes and topics. We do have a lot of people logged on to the meeting tonight, so we're going to get to as many of those questions as we can. We're also going to be focusing on questions that are most related to this planning effort and the topic at hand tonight, which is the Day Use Visitor Access Plan and Environmental Assessment. But again, feel free to put those in at any time. We are going to go through roughly about 30 slides, so about 30 minutes worth of a presentation. We'll take a really brief break at the end of that to let people go ahead and put their comments or go ahead and put their questions into that chat pod. So feel free to, again, put them in any time or put them in at the end, and we'll at that point get to as many questions as we can. When it comes to audio, you have your own audio options on your end. There is an adjust the sound feature down in the bottom left-hand corner. There is also embedded captioning right within this meeting. You can go ahead and hit that closed captioning box. It'll pop that up and provide captioning for you on this. We also have live captioning service available for this meeting. We're going to push that link through as an announcement on the meeting. So if using that live captioning service is helpful for you, go ahead, hit that link. It's going to open it in another browser window for you on your computer, and you can go ahead and catch the captioning there. So with those logistics out of the way, I will go ahead and turn this over to Kyle Patterson to start us into the introduction and background. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you, Rachel, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Patterson. I'm the Management Specialist and Public Affairs Officer here at Rocky Mountain National Park, and I'd like to echo Gary and Rachel's comments, just thanking you all so much for being here with us this evening. I know many of you have been engaged with this issue for years now, and so thank you for your continued engagement and involvement in this, and we look forward to hearing your questions and your comments as we move forward with this process. So we just wanted to remind you all of a few things. We know that the National Park Service is near and dear to many people's hearts, those who work for the National Park Service and those of you that are also very passionate about what we all do to protect so many of our amazing places. So just a reminder of what the Organic Act, the law is that created the National Park Service. You see that there on your slide, but basically it's the balancing act that we do every day as land managers to conserve park resources and to provide for their use and enjoyment, with the caveat that we're leaving them also unimpaired for future generations. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit tonight when we talk about the purpose and need for this plan. Also wanted to remind everybody that Rocky Mountain National Park also in 2009 became designated wilderness. 95% of the park did. And so that's also an important law and protection that we're looking at too as we move forward with the purpose and need for this environmental assessment that we're talking about this evening. Just a reference. Many of you obviously are very well dialed into Rocky Mountain National Park, and so we just wanted to remind you all of what this looks like as this amazing place that's been around since 1915, and all of the different areas that it protects that we'll talk about as well, and those fundamental resources and why the park was established 108 years ago. We'll talk about that as well and why it's so important to protect those things. So we're going to talk a little bit about our plan background and really wanted to highlight the purpose and need for the plan. So as we continue with our presentation this evening, as well as addressing your questions, this is really what we're going to continue to focus on, is why we have gone down this road, why we feel that there is a purpose and need for this important thing that we're all embarking on together. And it's really to protect and enhance the park's fundamental resources and values and achieve and maintain desired conditions. So I want to just remind everybody, we've seen a rapid growth at Rocky Mountain National Park since 2012. 2019 was a record visitation for the park with 4.6 million visitors, which was a 44% increase since 2012. And we have seen our record visitation for 5 years. You'll see that in the graph. In 2021, with a timed entry pilot in place, we also saw very high visitation at 4.4 million visitors. And so we're talking about that as well this evening, about what we've seen in our increased visitation. Next slide, please. And really the primary issues that this environmental assessment is addressing. And many of you who've been involved with this, or for those of you that this is your first time to really get engaged, we call it basically our 4 tenets. So the 4 areas that we're continuing to address with this plan is looking at the impacts that we're seeing with our increased visitation to our natural and cultural resources, the visitor experience, operational capacity, as far as what our facilities can withstand and what we can do to help in that manner, and then also visitor and staff safety. So those are the 4 tenets that are addressed in the environmental assessment and really the primary issues that this plan addresses. Next slide, please. Day use visitor access and managed access is not new to Rocky Mountain National Park. So we also wanted just to remind everybody, not only have we addressed visitor management in Rocky Mountain National Park, but it's occurred throughout the National Park Service in our organization's history. So we have addressed overnight use for decades in Rocky Mountain National Park with front country permits and wilderness permits. And so that has focused on overnight use. But we wanted to highlight some other actions we've taken over the years that really focus on day use at Rocky Mountain National Park. We've had a shuttle bus system in place since the late 70s in the Bear Lake Road corridor. And then in 2000, we made some significant improvements in that shuttle system, expanding areas like park and ride, having more frequent shuttle, and also numerous stops as well. In 2006, Hiker Shuttle was added to connect Estes Park to Rocky Mountain National Park, so encouraging visitors that were in the Estes Park area to leave their cars behind and access the park through the Hiker Shuttle. And then in 2015, real-time traffic with webcams at East Side entrance stations, Beaver Meadows entrance and Fall River entrance to really highlight what some of our lines were looking like so that visitors could plan ahead and know what impacts and visitation lines they might experience when coming through those entrance stations, so they could plan accordingly. And then in 2016 through 2019 was when we started managing access in the Bear Lake Road area and also active parking lot management and Alpine Visitor Center when we saw some of those numbers really increasing. So it was basically metering. Once those areas became congested and crowded, we turned people away in those areas. 2017, education continued with the Rocky Pledge. So we know how much people love this park. We all love Rocky and want to protect it. So how can we all embrace taking care of the park, whether it's through behavior or education and enforcement? Started Wild Basin road restrictions in 2017 through 2019, and then we started a pilot time entry permit system 2020 through 2023, continuing to try to address spreading visitor use out throughout the park and throughout the day. Next slide, please. So just an emphasis again on the time frame, particularly focused on the pilot. So we've led you up to the pilot system, and we wanted to just highlight again the time frame for these areas. And throughout all of these pilot systems, ongoing has also been parking deterrence, so putting up barriers so that people would park in established parking spaces was also very critical. So there's been a variety of tools we've been using in addition to the pilots that I just described, and the education and enforcement. So no matter what we do, we will continue to focus on that, because many of our visitors, this might be their first time to the park, and they're wanting to know the right ways to behave and protect this beloved area too. We also wanted to highlight that this is not only not new to Rocky Mountain National Park and the National Park Service, but that there's a number of other federal land management agencies. Many of them you might be able to see logos on your slide, but it's other agencies within the Department of Interior, like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the U.S. Forest Service. And so we really just wanted to highlight the National Park Service Visitor Use Management Objectives. This Interagency Visitor Use Management Council was established in 2011, so it's been around for a number of years. And it's really enhancing opportunities to connect visitors to the park's fundamental resources and values. It's important to implement effective visitor use management to improve visitor experiences and protect resources. And we wanted just to share with you that we've continued to build the foundation, define visitor use management direction, and now we're at the stage where we're identifying management strategies to get to the point where we can continue to implement, monitor, and adapt accordingly. We also just wanted to briefly highlight some of our previous civic engagement that we've done on this issue. So in the summer of 2021, a couple of years ago, we engaged with the public to ask people's thoughts on what issues most interfere with your desired park experiences, and what can the park do to better protect resources for future generations. That was a 60-day public comment period, and comments really helped us with our desired conditions and issue analysis and strategy identification, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. And then round 2 of our civic engagement was last winter, winter 22 and 23, where we really stepped into the next area, which was based on your desired experiences and protection of natural and cultural resources at Rocky, thinking back through our Organic Act and that critical aspect of leaving our resources unimpaired for future generations while we're all still enjoying and loving our park now. So what's the combination of ideas do you think best achieve the purpose of the plan? Got some great engagement on that as well, and use those comments to continue to move forward with where we are right now, which is our environmental assessment and day use visitor access plan. And so we have a 45-day public comment period. We'll highlight that a number of times during this presentation and how you can be involved and engaged. And we really, really appreciate you being here tonight to share the word as well when we're done with this, and continue to engage in helping us be part of this solution. So I'm going to then wrap up my comments until we have questions at the end and pass it along to John. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is John Hannon. I'm a management specialist here at the park also, and basically the project manager for this project on the park side. So tonight I'm going to take you through the alternatives that we've come up with. And first, kind of want to start with some of the basics of what is an alternative, what makes a good alternative. The alternatives here, they explore the ways to meet the purpose and need of the plan. Kyle stated the purpose and need for the plan, and we have to select alternatives that best address that purpose and need. And of course, they have to be feasible. They have to be economically feasible, technically feasible. That's where you start with some brainstorming, and then when you start to put it through the filters of, can we afford to do something like this? Can it even be done? That's when, the wild ideas like aerial tramways to Bear Lake kind of drop out of the planning process. And then they also need to be consistent with our existing policy and management objectives that we have for the area. There's a variety of plans in place that help us manage the park. And Kyle mentioned one of the biggest determinants the way we manage the park, and that's the Wilderness Act. Again, 95% of the park is wilderness, and we have to manage accordingly. So let's go to the next slide. So want to start out with kind of strategies that are common to all the alternatives. Another way to think of this is kind of business as usual. These are the things that we have been doing. These are things that we will continue to do regardless of the outcome of this plan. Certainly visitor information and orientation as core operations to the Park Service and core service to the public. Of course, that goes along with enforcement of park regulations and rules. We're always going to continue to seek technological improvements that make the visitor experience better, our operations better. Another thing Kyle mentioned, late 70s is when it started, and shuttles. They're going to continue to be a part of Rocky Mountain National Park. They play a key role. It's a great tool for us. And tied with that is transit partnerships. A great example of that is our relationship with the town of Estes Park and the integration with their shuttle system, but also with CDOT's new bus staying service that has been coming to the park to the past several years. Other things, the park has a lot of private inholders that will be business as usual. Tribal nation access for religious and traditional use purposes will stay the same. Also, commercial services available in the park. That will continue to be a part of park operations and availability for visitors. Temporary closures for high demand areas. We always have that tool in the toolbox. There's times where areas of the park get overrun with congestion, and these gets to a level where safety is compromised, where we might have to do a temporary closure until things kind of ease up in those areas. Let's move on to the next slide we have for you. So this is alternative A. This is the no action alternative. And to think about that, we have to kind of take a little trip back in time to kind of that 2016 to 2019 period. That is before we did any of the pilot timed entry systems. That is an era where we had no reservation systems. The public was able to access on a first come, first served basis, but we did employ a few management tools. That's when you had the Bear Lake road restrictions in place, Wild Basin road restrictions, again, triggered by when congestion warrant and safety warranted that. Again, with those temporary closures, they were very, varied in length and kind of a little bit unpredictable. Midsummer, they'd kind of get into a semi-predictable pattern, but the length of those closures was not always predictable, made it a little difficult for visitors to plan appropriately. But again, important to note that the no action alternative is pre-pilot time. So when you're thinking about what the no action is as part of this plan, it's prior to the timed entry pilots, which is pre-2020. So let's go to the next one. So this, we want to talk a little bit about the strategies that are common to all the action alternatives. So these strategies are common to the alternatives that I'll go through next, not common to the no action alternative. These will be actions or strategies that are part of this plan. One of those is, we'll talk about here in a minute, adopting a visitor zones and their associated desired conditions. The other thing that we're going to do if this plan is adopted is have a set of indicators and thresholds. These indicators are very important. They let us know if the plan is meeting the goals that we've laid out for it. We're going to monitor key aspects of natural resources, traffic patterns, encounter rates on trails, and those things will tell us whether the plan is working or not working. This is a key one, this next one, and you'll probably get tired of me emphasizing it on the remaining slides here, but timed entry reservations for the Bear Lake Road corridor is common to all three of the action alternatives. After much discussion and much thinking about these alternatives, there is no way that we can meet the purpose and need of this plan without having the timed entry system on the Bear Lake Road corridor. So again, like I said, just giving you a warning, you probably get tired of me saying that, but I'm going to emphasize that with all three of the following alternatives. Also, reservation systems are part of some of these action alternatives, associated fees, and again, commercial visitor services, is also part of it. Another key element of the plan is we have identified visitor capacities for key areas of the park. These capacities are based on the limiting attributes of those certain areas, and that can be a variety of things from, sensitive and rare plant species, capacity of trailheads and parking, and a whole variety of things that help us determine what a certain area can handle as far as visitor capacities. So let's go to the next slide. So again, kind of reemphasizing that timed entry reservations for the Bear Lake Road corridor are part of the next three alternatives, as part of all action alternatives. Again, we feel there's no way to meet the purpose and need of the plan without having timed entry on the Bear Lake Road corridor. Bear Lake Road corridor is the most popular section of the park. About 60% of the park's parking capacity is located within that corridor, as well as a variety of very popular trails and the shuttle system as well that serves that area. In here, there's the 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. is listed for upon implementation of the plan. We would do that. That's been done in the pilots for the last several years. That would be the reservation period. The one thing, the length of the season and kind of some of the numbers associated with the reservation systems, we're leaving the specifics out of this because we want to maintain the ability to be adaptive and manage adaptively. Visitation patterns when the park change somewhat. I've worked at Rocky a very long time. Our visitation patterns are pretty stable, but they do change from time to time, and we want to be able to be flexible and be responsive to that. We don't want to have reservation system in place when we don't need it, and vice versa. We don't want to have a reservation not in place when we do need it. So let's go to the next slide. So again, I mentioned earlier desired conditions. We've identified 3 visitor use zones. The map there, I know it's probably a little small for your screen. And again, the map is also detailed in the environmental assessment document, which I would refer you to read more in detail. But zones 1 and 2 there, which is the green and the purple, those are both designated wilderness. So that is the 95% of the park that's designated wilderness. The Wilderness Act lays out our first set of desired conditions that we need to meet. Things such as characteristics of pristine natural conditions, the opportunity for solitude. All of those things mentioned in the Wilderness Act are values that we seek in those two zones. Again, I mentioned earlier, indicators and thresholds. These are a key tool for us to measure the success of the plan and make sure it's working. And when we see that indicators are, or thresholds, excuse me, are being met or exceeded, it's time to make a correction in the plan to make sure that we are meeting our goals. Again, I did go into visitor capacities. Again, they're required by law for us to set for certain areas. And again, much more detail on visitor capacities are available in the environmental assessment document, and I would refer you there if you want to get down into the detail on that. Next slide. All right, so it's time to talk about our first action alternative, Alt B. This one is a little easier to explain than some of the other ones, because if you're familiar with the pilot timed entry systems that have been in place since 21 to present, this is basically what alternative B is. You'd have two types of reservations. You'd have the Bear Lake Road corridor, which again, common to all of these, and the rest of the park. Again, Bear Lake Road, you'd have that 5 a.m. to 6 p.m., but the rest of the park, you'd have a much shorter reservation window, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. This alternative, this allows us to provide the maximum access to the park while meeting the purpose and need, and really allowing us to spread that use not only throughout the day, but throughout the park as well. Let's go to the next slide. So alternative C, and again, alternative C includes timed entry for Bear Lake Road corridor. So that's a given. What the difference is here is we would be doing daily reservations instead of timed entry reservations for the rest of the park. So that 9 to 2 period, you would get a reservation and be able to come in at any time during that 9 to 2. So basically, instead of a 2-hour window to come in, you'd have that 9 to 2 as your entire window. The one thing about that, though, in order to meet the desired conditions for the park and meet that purpose and need, the visitor patterns in the park are pretty consistent, and we have the peak of the visitation coming in that core midday. And we expect that most people would not self-spread, and they would come pretty much all at the same time, right in the middle of that reservation period. And in order to manage for that, we would have to have a slightly lower number of reservations available than we currently do in the pilots and what is proposed in Alt B. Let's go to the next one. So alternative D, again, includes timed entry reservations for the Bear Lake Road corridor. So again, that 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. But for the rest of the park, it would be no reservations required. It would be on a first come, first served basis. But what we anticipate happening at that is we would reach a capacity sometime during the day that would warrant us closing access to the park at the entrance stations under this alternative. That, again, does provide spontaneity for visitors, but again, it's got a lot of unpredictability. We'd be managing to a set number of vehicles coming through the entrance, and once that was met, we need to shut down access to the park for you know, an unknown amount of hours, maybe a couple hours, maybe longer, and then until we could reopen traffic or reopen inbound traffic to the park. All right, let's go to the next slide. So I know that's a lot of information, so we tried to condense it down here to a kind of a short table for comparative purposes. And again, take the opportunity to refer you to the EA document itself to get down into the very broad details that we can't and don't have time for here. But again, the summary here, timed entry for Bear Lake is common to all three of these action alternatives. Again, some of the volumes that we expect, this is park-wide volumes for under alternative B. We'd probably be at about, we'd be shooting for 7,300 vehicles per day. Alternative C, we'd expect around 7,000. Again, you'd have that decrease in the rest of the park during the daily reservation entry period because we're anticipating visitors would not self-spread and come in a very concentrated manner. And then an alternative D, estimating about 6,600 vehicles during the day because of that unknown closure period that we would have to enact when congestion and safety warranted it for the rest of the park. Again, looking specifically at purpose and need here for visitor experience, Alt B provides the best balance of a quality visitor experience with the most quantity of access. Down there in the graph is a representation of the traffic flow inbound. And what you see is a small peak before and after the reservation period for the rest of the park. But you see pretty consistent visitation coming in throughout the day. You look at alternative C, it's a little more sporadic. We have a drop in visitation midday, again, because of that daily reservation. You'd see a minor spike in the middle of the day when most visitors would come during that rest of the park daily reservation. And then Alt D, you see a big push in the morning and then closure period during the middle of the day. There would still be some traffic coming in because Bear Lake Road is still under, or Bear Lake Road corridor is still under timed entry there. So anyway, let's go to the next slide. And I think this is alternatives and actions that were considered but dismissed. Again, you know, we looked at a variety of things before we came upon these three action alternatives. Some of the things that we looked at, and we looked at these because, and they were dismissed because they weren't a standalone solution. Not saying that some of these would not be incorporated in other actions and what we talked about earlier in the common to all. But a standalone intelligent transportation system, that's the use of the variable message signs, real-time information hitting your phone to tell you about congestion and parking availability. Expanded infrastructure was considered but dismissed. Again, 95% of the park is designated wilderness. It doesn't give us a lot of area to build out, certainly not in the areas that we would need to. And again, things like parking lots and other expansions are costly as well. And like I mentioned, probably couldn't put them in the places that we really needed them either. Expanded shuttle service. Again, shuttles are a great tool for us, but they're not the answer to everything. As a standalone answer, more shuttles could, in a lot of cases, create more issues than they resolve. The other thing that we looked at was multi-day reservations. Again, all these alternatives are based on a reservation for that day. Doesn't mean that you can't get a reservation for 3 days in a row, but we're not able to facilitate multi-day reservations because folks, it's unpredictable how many people would come each day, and then we have to lower the number, and that cuts access for everybody. And then one of the other things that was considered was dismissed. Again, daily reservations for the Bear Lake Road corridor. We're really looking to spread that use. Spreading that use allows us to bring the number of people that we can have access the park up. Let's go to the next one. Oh, I'm sorry. It's time for turning it over to Rachel. So thanks, everybody. And Rachel?
You bet, John. I'll pick it up from here. So we did also want, as we're orienting folks to the plan and environmental assessment, also wanted to orient folks to the analysis that accompanies the description of the alternatives that John just went through. So also in the document, we have an entire chapter dedicated to analysis. It's chapter 3. And in that chapter, we really talk about the current and expected future conditions of a variety of resources. And we analyze the resources that are displayed on your screen on this slide right now. These resources are really connected to key issues in an important way. And these are also where we start to see some variability. The alternatives all achieve purpose and need, but they achieve purpose and need in different ways. And by doing this analysis, it helps us describe and show how the different alternatives impact these different resources differently. And so as you go through this section, you can go through these descriptions, see the differences between the alternatives as they pertain to the resources that are on the screen. This also allows us to really show how we're trying to protect our fundamental resources and values, provide access to high quality visitor experiences. Now, this is not all of the resources that are in the park. There are a lot of resources that are really important to management of the park and protection of park resources. There are a number of other resources that we talked about as a part of our planning process. These are the impact topics that we considered, but didn't carry forward for detailed analysis. And the reason that we didn't carry these forward for detailed analysis is that because when you look at each alternative, the differences between the alternatives and how they relate to these resources doesn't vary much alternative to alternative. So there is a description of these resources, the relationship between the plan actions and how they relate to purpose and need as it relates to these topics in an appendix to the document. So we just want to encourage folks to look at that. So when you look at chapter 3 and say, it feels like we're missing some things, there are more resources. We did talk about them. Again, they don't really help us see key differences between the alternatives. And so they have a more abbreviated analysis in an appendix. So that's a little bit of an orientation to the analysis component of the environmental assessment. So next we wanted to touch on how you can participate in this process, how you can help inform our next steps. We have been working through a number of phases as a part of this project. Kyle touched on it earlier in the presentation, where we were really working on defining purpose and need for the project, thinking about what we were solving for, what were the problems, how do we know that they were problems. We went through a process in last fall and earlier this spring to explore strategies, refine them, understand feasibility, and got your feedback as a part of that process last winter. We have been working since that comment period closed in February with additional refinement, analysis, and putting together the plan. And now we're really excited to share all of that hard work with you of what we've pulled together. So we are at this phase, sharing the plan and then working towards getting through that analysis of your comments and feedback before we make a final decision later in the spring. For folks who have maybe been oriented to our website, you can provide your comments on our park planning, environment, and public comment website. The link has been probably dropped in the chat. We'll drop it a couple more times throughout this meeting if you need it. We also wanted to share this screenshot to let you know that you're looking for this comment now button. That will get you to the digital comment form. That's really the best way to provide comments. We'd love to hear from you in your own words. If you're looking for a copy of the document, on this same page, if you scroll further down, you'll get another version of the comment now button. And the ability to download the plan is down at the bottom of this page. And so you can go ahead and click there, download a copy of the plan, so that way you can really dig into the description of the alternatives and the rich analysis that is a part of that document, and be able to provide your comments on that. So when we say provide comments, what are the most helpful comments that you could provide for us to really engage in this process in a meaningful way? So we're really hoping that your comments address your thoughts and feedback on the purpose and need for action, the environmental issues and the topics that we analyzed, any feedback you have on the alternatives, and how we're describing the affected environment and the environmental consequences. Really specifically, if we boil that down, we're looking to see if you have any feedback for us on the accuracy or adequacy of the environmental analysis, and are there opportunities to better explain the alternatives or to better describe the analysis that we could use to kind of improve this document as we go forward. Again, the URL is there on the screen for where to provide your comments. Really looking forward to hearing from y'all on those and to reading all of those letters and all of that feedback. Did want to remind folks that we aren't taking comments as a part of this meeting tonight. We are using this opportunity to field questions make sure everyone has a clear understanding of what is in the document, what kind of feedback we're looking for, and also to make sure that people have access to all the information that they need access on to participate meaningfully in that. So with that, we are going to transition into the Q&A period of this. I have been seeing, we have a lot of people in this meeting, and we also have a lot of questions coming in. So what we're going to do right now is, by my clock, it is 6:42 Mountain Time. We're going to take a 3-minute break right here. So if you needed an opportunity to get up and stretch, grab a refill on a glass of water or a cup of tea, this would be a great time to do that. We're going to organize the questions in by kind of themes to try to see if we can get through as many of these that are related to the plan that we're discussing tonight as we can. This will also be a chance for all of y'all who have been listening intently and didn't want to be typing listening at the same time to go ahead and type any questions that you might have about the plan and environmental assessment into the Q&A feature. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And again, we'll take roughly about a 3-minute break here for you all to get your questions in, for us to organize them by themes, and we'll start answering questions at 6:45. So we'll see you back in a minute. Okie doke. I hope folks got a good stretch in as we're getting ready to go. I don't want to linger too long. Hope that was helpful for folks to get a little bit of a quick break, but we're going to jump into Q&A because there's a lot of great questions in here. So I'll be facilitating our Q&A and inviting some folks from the park to join me for responses to questions. John Hannon, these first couple are coming your direction on the alternatives. So first question that we have for you is, why does the Bear Lake corridor begin before Moraine Park, and then it reduces access to Fern into Cub Lake Trail? So can you help us with the decision about why the extent of the Bear Lake corridor is what it is?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons that drove that decision to make the Bear Lake corridor what it's been under the pilots. In 2017, we had a pretty extensive traffic study, which included some handing out of GPS units to see where people actually went. This was in conjunction with the road restrictions that we did in the Bear Lake Road corridor. And for folks that are familiar, that happened further up the road near the Cayley Cottage turnoff. That was beyond the intersection with the Moraine Fern Road. What we found under that study was most people went to Fern Lake Road and parked there just to sit out the restriction time. Caused a lot of impact in that area. So that was one of the factors that led us to bring in Fern Lake into the Bear Lake Road corridor. The other factor there is that encompasses the 2 shuttle routes. That way they're completely into the Bear Lake Road corridor. If we had shuttle stops that were exterior to the corridor, we would introduce an artificial way for folks to get into the corridor, thus increasing the capacity, or not increasing the capacity, overrunning the design capacity that we have under the reservation system. So we felt the best way to address that was to move the definition of the corridor down to the junction with the Trail Ridge Road there. That way the entire areas, including Fern, is part of the Bear Lake Road corridor. The other thing that does for us, it does increase the capacity for that corridor by having that area and that parking in the Fern, and Moraine area.
Okay, great, thanks. Don't go too far. I've got more for you on the alternatives. For alternatives B, C, and D, do we anticipate any changes relative to the pilot in either the number of slots available in the Bear Lake corridor at each window, or the percentage of slots for the corridor that are set aside for day before reservations?
Initially, we're anticipating that the number of reservations would be remain stable. We've found that is kind of the maximum number of reservations that we can have when all the systems work, where parking is relatively available most periods of the day. Shuttle bus queuing is at a reasonable length. We like to say if we pushed it anymore, we'd probably start breaking the system. I think the one variable in there that would change the number of reservations is right now in the pilots, and it's been very consistent. We've had about a 30% no-show rate into the Bear Lake Road corridor. If that was to go lower, we would, because what we do to compensate for 30% not coming each day is we sell more so we can reach the target for the corridor. If that number was to drop, let's say it dropped down to 15%, then we would have to adjust because we would start to see too many people in the corridor throughout the day there. The other question was night before. Right now, during the pilots, we've increased the percentage that go on sale for the night before and reduced the advance. What we found throughout the pilots is our visitors to Rocky like the flexibility to book later than earlier, and so we've adjusted to kind of meet that preference there. And but at this point moving forward, I don't think we'd make any changes immediately, but again, want to remain adaptive. If things drastically change, we could change those numbers, but not in the foreseeable future.
Great, thanks, John. I'm coming at you with another numbers question because I know they're your favorite. Why would the number of permits be reduced so much under Alt C compared to Alt B? Why would there need to be a reduction in the number of permits for the rest of the park in that alternative?
Yeah, that's a good question there. And the main reason is because based on the data that we have for visitor use patterns outside of timed entry, we found that people really concentrate and come in, in that 10 to 2 window, or even tighter than that on some days. And so we'd anticipate that instead of people self-spreading out throughout that period, they would come in a concentrated fashion. And that's when you start to get where parking lots get overrun, everybody's vying for the available parking, trailheads get congestion, restrooms get hit hard. And we know this because the last 2 years, the day after timed entry has ended, visitor patterns have shot back to that real peak midday of folks coming in. So even the day after timed entry ends, visitors revert back to that typical Rocky pattern of all coming at once midday. So that's why we have to reduce that daily number. You give the flexibility, but unfortunately, not everybody would self-spread out, and we'd anticipate big rushes at peak times.
Okay, great. I've got one more for you on the alternatives. There are some questions about what does all of this mean for winter? There's some articles from people hearing some things about the potential for strategies for kind of reservations or permits in the winter time, but they're having a hard time finding that in the document or in the alternative. So can you give folks a little bit of orientation to where we talk about winter use, what the toolbox looks like, and where they can learn more about those strategies?
Yeah, and I think you hit right on it there, Rachel. I mean, there is some reference to, this ties back to that adaptive management that we want to build into this plan. Not in the foreseeable future. We don't foresee winter use getting to a point where we'd need a reservation system, but we want to give ourselves the flexibility in the future that if it did, we could enact something for some of those key winter weekends where it gets really busy in the park. The other thing to keep in mind, especially in the Bear Lake Road corridor related to winter, is we do lose some parking capacity there with the park and ride lot mainly serving that shuttle service. We don't run shuttles in the winter typically. Large shuttle buses and icy roads don't usually go well together. So we would lose some traffic capacity, or parking capacity in the winter as well, which may help us trigger the need for, some type of reservation system. Again, not in the foreseeable future, but we want to be adaptive. We're doing all this planning, we're doing this analysis. We want to take a look at it now in case we do need it at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks very much. We're going to transition over to another part of the document and talk a little bit about timeline. I think there was a question about, so where do we go from here? What does the timeline look like? I'll go ahead and take that one. As we talked a little bit earlier on a slide, that we are working on the draft plan now. Comments are going to be open through December 14th. We're going to be then taking our time to go through all of those comments, analyze them, develop responses to the substantive things that we hear, and then start looking at that final decision-making phase. And so we are going to be working on that probably through spring and expect to make a final decision and get the announcement out about what that final decision looks like sometime in spring of 2024. And I think also, all of the alternatives might not be implemented all at once too. We'll make a decision about what the selected action looks like and then start turning our attention to what implementation looks like after that decision has been made. And again, that's probably likely going to be in the spring. Okay. We had another question or another couple questions that were related to the impact analysis and how we're thinking about impacts. And so one of the questions that we got was about natural resources and how we kind of looked at the natural resources within this plan and the project and how we're measuring them. And so I'll go ahead and answer that one too. we are analyzing alpine tundra, lake shores, and stream sides. Those are the ones where we really see differences between the alternatives and what those impacts look like. To inform that impact analysis, we are using the professionals that are here in the park, their observations, as well as the data that they are out doing and collecting when they are in the field as professionals who work within the agency. We are also using past and recent research to inform that analysis, scoping efforts, and comments. We also monitor natural resources all of the time and have indicators for the visitor use impacts for those. So there's an additional description about how we're measuring and monitoring those impacts into the future that are in Appendix C. We also got another question about the long lines that we see in entrance stations. That's a lot of cars that are all queued up in those lines, and that is a lot of idling that could be happening in those entrance lines. And they're kind of curious, like, how does that play into this analysis? How are we thinking about those air quality impacts? And we did take a look at air quality and understand those long lines. Really, when we took a look at it, we found that it's one of those issues that all of the alternatives are trying to address, reducing those queues at the entrance lines so that we don't have all of that idling. And so there's not a lot of variability necessarily between the alternatives when it comes to that idle time or to that associated air quality impact. And so there is a discussion of that in Appendix F of the document in the section where we talk about the resources that weren't carried forward for detailed analysis. And I think that I will grab one more alternatives one before we keep moving. And it looks like there was a question about alternative C, that there is a mention in there for the potential for a permit for Long's Peak, but that proposal is a little bit vague. Are there any more details to be shared for what this requirement would be? So I wanted to explain this point a little bit. During the pre-NEPA phases and in previous public comment periods, we did receive comments from folks about different ways that we could manage Long Peak more directly as opposed to through the reservation systems, either timed entry or daily entry permit systems. When we took a look at that idea, we said, well, this is something that could help us meet purpose and need. And felt when we looked at it that it was something we could analyze, something that could potentially be implementable. So when John talked about those ideas of what makes up a good alternative, that we could consider that. We also felt like, though, given that that idea would be more of a daily permit, it fit better with the daily permits ideas. So it's not in the preferred, it's in alternative C with the other daily permit option. And this could look a lot of different ways. An educational permit could look like an online video. It could look like getting information from a ranger. If this idea is selected or if this alternative is selected, we would continue to work on those details prior to implementation and also would welcome your feedback on that idea. If you think that this would be helpful, we'd love to hear why and how it supports purpose and need. If you think that this would be distracting in some way to a resource or to your experience, we'd also love to hear that. And so let us know what you think about that idea. Okay. Then let's keep going through some additional questions that we have. I'm going to go over to Kyle. Kyle, we had a question about someone who is a local resident and that the timed entry system is a little bit challenging for them. So how has the park thought about locals, how they interface with these systems, and what opportunities are there for those folks who live proximate to the park?
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. You know, we certainly heard this question quite frequently as we've done our civic engagement that we highlighted previously. And so we addressed this in the EA. This is in Chapter 3 in the socioeconomic impact topic section. So we encourage folks to look in that, read that section. Tell us if you think our analysis is correct. And if you disagree, please provide us some specifics, you know, maybe other resources or sources of information that will help us on that as well. We do want to address or highlight some of the questions about I am a local, or I am a senior, or I am a Coloradoan, or I am this. And wanting to have different access as a result of this. So maybe just highlighting a couple of the general thoughts on that quickly. So I think one of the things that we want to share as well is what really defines a local. Is a local an Estes Park or a Grand Lake resident? Is that a part-time resident? Is it a Colorado resident? Is it somebody who lives along the Front Range? So really what defines a local is certainly a question for people to kind of be processing and thinking through. Realizing that seniors, people that can get a senior pass are those over 62, which certainly incorporates a large segment of our society and population. So needing to think through that as well. Also just realizing that Rocky Mountain National Park is a national park. And so to provide special access to locals or to seniors over other groups is not something that a national park would want to do. We also acknowledge and honor that many people who particularly live in Estes Park or Grand Lake, you know, are communities that are right on the doorstep that we live in as well, that are right on the doorstep of the park. You know, that's a big reason that people live here, is to have access to Rocky. And so we also want to acknowledge and honor that and hope that we can continue to be adaptable and flexible in some of our alternatives, that locals can take advantage of their proximity. Seniors can take advantage of their proximity potentially to get in the park before and after reservations are required. We also want to express too that many local residents have expressed concerns themselves about the crowding and congestion and traffic impacts that spread out into the community. So also honoring that we're also hearing from locals and residents that they want us to address this level of crowding and congestion because it impacts not only their visits to the park, but also you know, just the traffic getting into the park. So that's something we want to continue to address, and the actions we've talked about, no matter whether you're local or a visitor or a senior, is really our focus is to spread use out throughout the day and throughout the park. And so treating everyone similarly is very, very important as that is concerned. And also just to remind people that most of our surveys that we've taken at Rocky demonstrate that more than 30% of our visitors are from Colorado. So thinking through, you know, what level of visitation we have that are Colorado residents. Populations continue to grow along the Front Range of Colorado as well. So certainly locals and residents and Coloradoans also need to be part of the solution in helping us take care of Rocky for future generations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kyle. I am noticing that there are more questions about the environmental analysis, which is fantastic. And we are loving those. So we're going to grab a couple more of those. I'll go ahead and take those. One question we had is how the visitor experience is measured. How do we analyze an idea like visitor experience? So I will start by saying that there is a really robust discussion on this topic in Chapter 3 of the EA. I would really encourage folks to give that a read through. On the highest level, we look at studies. For example, partners from Utah State University have conducted a visitor experience study, and you can find more information on all of those studies referenced in the chapter. We also have studies done from other national parks with similar systems or with similar conditions. So, for example, another study done at Arches National Park compared visitor perceptions and characteristics when there was support for timed entry systems to improve visitor experiences. So this study really found that visitor experiences park-wide and while hiking improved during their pilot timed entry systems, and the visitors were more supportive of those systems because it allowed for more sustainable use of the park. We also had surveys done at Rocky during experiences during the pilots, and those found that, you know, visitors experience reduced congestion during the pilots we've had recently. And also a large number of respondents, like 76% of respondents, indicated that their park experience under timed entry was the same or somewhat better than they had previously experienced while they were in Rocky Mountain National Park. And almost half reported that their experience was somewhat better or much better. And so we are getting this data in. I would also say that we're looking at all of y'all's public comments, and looking at that as another source for us, because many comments that we had supported these findings from the surveys that showed that visitor experiences were improved under the pilots that were done at Rocky over the last couple of years for timed entry. I also saw that we had a question that came in related to the visitor capacity analysis. There were questions about, are these public information? Where would we find them? How do we come up with these numbers? So I'll go ahead and take that one too. The plan follows the guidance that we have set out by what Kyle mentioned is the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. That information about how we do the analysis, the process that we follow for that is on their website. There's a whole guidebook for it. Basically, what we're doing is we're looking for what is the maximum amount and type of use that an area can accommodate while achieving those desired conditions that John talked about. And so we're looking at that. There is a detailed analysis, both what the components of the analysis and the identified capacities for areas that are within this plan are included in Appendix D. And again, there is the rationale and any data that we use to support those decisions is included in that appendix. So I encourage folks to check those out. And I think from there, we are going to hop over and take a look at some questions that might be coming in related to wilderness. There is a question about how the plan addresses visitor access to the park in general, which is the front country, but what does this mean for day use management in the wilderness area? And I'll go ahead and jump in on that one too, that we really think that this day use visitor access plan complements the backcountry and wilderness management plan by providing management direction for areas that are accessed by day users. And so there is some overlap between these two management plans. And what we really are doing is looking at how many people we're delivering to these different areas. And so really seeing this as an opportunity to support the decision-making in the backcountry plan, and also really thinking about how can we make sure that whatever we're doing in the front country areas or within the transportation systems is making sure that it is also protective of those wilderness values. So it's another place where we do have a discussion in the analysis about what does all this mean for wilderness? What does it mean for the wilderness character values that are represented within Rocky Mountain National Park? So another section in Chapter 3 that I think is a really neat read and would encourage people to check out. Okay, we've got another question about alternatives. John, we have a commercial use question, so I'm going to come to you with that one. We have someone who's concerned about what does this mean for commercial use and could it lead to potential increases just because you have a lot of money to pay for a guide or for a tour? Should you get preferential access over the public? So how are we proposing to keep an eye on commercial use? How are we proposing to manage that as a part of the overall system?
Well, I like this question because we had the same question when we were going through this process. And then certainly through the pilots, we were looking at commercial use and especially very keen on to see if there was an uptick in new operators and new requests for permits for commercial use. So a little bit of background for commercial use and then how it fits into the plan. Commercial use in Rocky has, again, been fairly stable over the last 10 years. It's hovers underneath 2% of our total visitation comes in through commercial tour. One of the things that we saw in 21 during the pilot, we saw a lot of interest in trying to, in commercial operators wanting to expand that. Fortunately, we've seen that it stabilized and stayed its kind of long-term current level. So the way that we've addressed it in the plan is kind of to scale it. We wouldn't implement anything for commercial operators initially. And if you dive down into the environmental assessment, there is a section on commercial use. And the way that we've crafted that section is if we did see an increase above the 2% of visitation in commercial use for 2 consecutive years, we would begin to roll them into a reservation system as well. That way, kind of keeping their level of use at a consistent level. Right now, when you see those numbers in the alternative, the number of vehicles, commercial use is actually a part of that. We know the amount of commercial use that we typically get and account for that in those vehicle totals as we're shooting for those totals under each of the alternatives. So we would be able to, if use got above the 2% of visitation level, we'd be able to maintain it at that level by incorporating them into the reservation system. Upon implementation, we don't see that happening. But again, like I said, if it happened for 2 consecutive years, then we would roll them into the reservation system where they would need to compete and get for reservations to operate in the park.
Great, thank you, John. One more question for you related to shuttles. Are there any thoughts on having a shuttle bus that could go up Trailbridge Road, maybe to the Alpine Visitor Center, or that stops at other points around the way down? How have we thought about that, and what do you think about it?
We have thought about that for a number of years, even before we were thinking about this plan. A shuttle bus to along Trailbridge Road comes with many issues that we have to overcome. Again, tell you some things about transit, and certainly what's happening with transit currently is the price of shuttle bus operation has increased dramatically. In our new contract, we saw about a 25% increase in the cost. A lot of that's driven by the capital equipment cost. New buses, the price of new buses has gone up considerably. The other thing with the Trailbridge Road route is it'd be quite long. And so that racks up your service hours for the shuttle. And then the other thing that we found is 20 minutes seems to be about the magic number for visitors to really appreciate and use a shuttle. Shuttle routes and timing that is longer than 20 minutes, you see a significant decrease in the use. So I think that's would be another kind of problematic thing to overcome for Trailbridge Road. And then the other thing that we've seen, in the last 15 years with Trailbridge Road and kind of transit is we've seen the outcropping of some of these kind of shuttle van tours that take people up Trailbridge Road and or Old Fall River Road. And that is kind of fulfilling that niche of for the folks that don't want to drive, the folks want to take some kind of transit up Trailbridge Road. But for the park to run that and to run it at a level where it would really get some use is quite cost prohibitive. And then, like I said, it's a very long drive and people just don't seem to want to use transit with over 20-minute wait or 20-minute commute on there. So we have looked at that, but yeah, there's a lot of factors against it being successful in the park.
Great. And John, I have another one for you about the alternatives. We also have heard, or some folks are hearing some thoughts about the possibility for a year-round system. Is that something we're considering? How would we be considering it? What does that look like? And where could people find out more information about what changes might occur into the future as we start to think about how patterns might change? They think think this is part of the common to all options. Could we say a little bit more about what the seasonality looks like?
Yeah, I mean, the seasonality, again, when you get down to those alternatives, when you're looking at those vehicle totals, let's just use alternative B, the preferred alternative. We're looking for 7,200 vehicles a day. There's many days outside of the, main kind of, let's just say, summer visitation season that we don't reach that 7,200 vehicle day, and it's actually considerably less. Like a Wednesday in January, we wouldn't really need to be it's going to be a very long time, I think, until we got to the level where we would need a reservation system, where we'd be anywhere near those numbers. And like I mentioned previously, some of those winter capacity numbers, because of, Trail Ridge Road being closed, we lose the functionality of the park and ride in the Bear Lake Road corridor. That brings our capacity down a little bit, but it doesn't really bring the capacity down to a lot of times of what's typically called the off season that would warrant a reservation system or something. So the idea of making it year round, I think we'd need a significant change in visitation to warrant that. I will say, and we did talk about this a little earlier, I think there are some significant use specific in the Bear Lake Road corridor in the winter that may warrant some kind of, reservation system. But again, I don't think we're here, I don't think in 24 or 25, we're going to be at that threshold. But again, part of the plan is giving us some adaptive management capabilities to where if we did get to that, so we can meet the purpose and need, and preserve that visitor experience in the wintertime, we could enact some of these things. But a year-round system, I think we're years away from that, if ever.
Okay, great. I am going to jump over to a couple questions that I think Kyle would be really helpful to have answer for us. We have a question for folks, and I know you talked about this a little bit in background, but hoping you can unpack it for us a little bit, Kyle. Can you talk a little bit more about what the conditions of the park were like and what people were experiencing at the highest levels of visitation before we enacted pilots? Folks are thinking, like, I assume that's kind of why we started down this road, but can you say a little bit more about what we were seeing before we started the pilots?
Yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, Rachel, that time period seems so long ago. So I'm happy to capture that, especially if people weren't here to experience that. So pre-pilots, we talked a little bit about it in our presentation, that 2016 through 2019, where we started restricting access in those highly congested areas, Bear Lake Road, Alpine Visitor Center, and Wild Basin, when congestion and crowding warranted. So basically, we were turning people around. Let's just give July of 2019 as an example, turning people around every day in these areas, usually 9:30, 10 a.m. in the morning, and not knowing when they could come back and access those areas. That also happened almost every day in August, weekends in June and September. So a lot of frustrations for park visitors who are wanting to access an area, and we could not help them in giving them information on when they could come back or when there might be parking available. Certainly also saw a lot of anger and frustration as well when people did get to the certain areas like Bear Lake, where they just circled the parking lot over and over. And there were visitor to visitor confrontations, visitor to staff and volunteer confrontations. And so it became, a very troubling time for a number of years when we were trying to just do these stopgap short-term measures and just dealing with the issue at hand. We wondered if when we just did operations in those areas, we'd push impacts elsewhere, and that's exactly what happened. So we could focus on those areas, but then we just push some of those impacts to other areas in the park. And so just wanting to continue to look at this as a park-wide operation. So then we started moving into piloting systems for timed entry in 2020. And we did not elaborate earlier in the presentation, but those looked different each year based on parking capacity. So initially it was 60 to 70%, and we continue to increase that, as John mentioned, on parking capacity. And so that's certainly how that has evolved since 2016 through this past year. And when we've really tried to learn as much as we can, we've collected data each year, and that's why we have tweaked and adjusted them, the pilots each year based on that, on what we've learned. For instance, between 22 and 23, we knew that from our data that we could look at that 2 to 3 p.m. window, provide more spontaneous and accessibility after 2. And because we saw a number of people leaving the park at that point. So the turnover continued to help inform those timeframes, as well as the visitation each month. As John mentioned, those visitation trends can change too, so that's not what we're looking at solely. So hopefully that answered the question, Rachel, that you had. If there's any other parts of that I did not answer, please let me know.
I think that's good, and I think folks can let us know if they've got follow-on questions. I think there was another question that folks had about, we keep using the term pilots for some of these. So Kyle, can you walk us through a little bit? Why are we using the term pilot for what we've been using the last couple of years, and what does it mean?
Great. So I think just to capture what my previous response was, is pilots are really intended for us to learn each year and to adjust and to also look at the data. So we've been doing extensive monitoring each year to look at what the level of visitation is during that time, the consistency of what that looks like, and then what the impacts are in other areas of the park, whether it's Bear Lake Road or other locations. We also have learned that Bear Lake Road needs to be treated very differently and separately than the rest of the park. That Bear Lake Road, certainly has amazing experiences for visitors, whether it's hiking or fishing. And so we know that that area is going to get concentrated use. So we've continued to, we assumed that, and our pilots have continued to help us determine that from the data we've collected. And so we've learned each year, and as we've moved on a parallel course of long-range visitor use management planning as well. So we use the term pilots, certainly because we're tweaking and learning and adjusting and adapting.
Okay, and Kyle, I have one more for you, so don't go too far. We have some folks with questions about how we're thinking about diversity in both our region and the nation, and how it interfaces with this planning effort. So we're hoping you can speak a little bit to how or if any of our analysis addresses how we're looking at different populations that may be advantaged or disadvantaged based on the need to pre-plan, what a system like this looks like. What have we learned through the pilots? How are we analyzing this when it comes to the timed entry approaches?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this question as well. So, as we talked a little bit about the whole looking at, residents and visitors that are coming from other states. We analyze this in the socioeconomic chapter of our environmental assessment, which is chapter 3. So certainly the question or wanting to dive deeper into this particular question, we'd encourage you to look at chapter 3 on how we analyze that as well. I think it's important to note at this point that the National Park Service has started an initiative this past year on solely looking at completing socioeconomic surveys to better understand barriers to visitation. And so Rocky Mountain National Park was one of the first parks this year selected to, last year selected to look at what those impacts, barriers to visitation are. And the results indicate that the primary barriers for visitors coming to Rocky Mountain National Park in particular really focus on the distance to travel to parks and the costs associated with the travel. So we certainly understand that there are technological barriers that we want to continue to address, not only at Rocky Mountain National Park, but for other purposes as well. And so we understand that there are factors associated, with reservation systems, and the park's identified strategies to mitigate some of these concerns, such as providing, iPads in visitor centers, working closely with our amazing partners at public libraries who are also helping with those options and availability of internet connection and connectivity we realize is really important. So we want to continue to provide those tools here at the park and also work with partners to work with people before they come to Rocky so that they're aware of that and can access that. And we've also heard from other studies that the National Park Unit found that a timed entry system did not result in significant changes to visitor demographics such as race, income, or education. And so we'll continue to explore opportunities of what those barriers may be. And also wanted to share that there are certain things that the National Park Service as an agency focuses on, fee-free days in the park, because we also understand that we haven't travel barriers to get here. We also have entrance pass fees that are required to visit the park. So certainly looking at both of those. Department of Interior has a certain number of fee-free days each year, so visitors can access the park without paying an entrance fee during those days. Also want to highlight that because we know transportation is a barrier, we have a really good relationship with the Colorado Department of Transportation on a bus staying service that's been happening for the last couple of years. Weekends and holidays, Memorial Day through mid-October, that provides a great opportunity for public transportation from the Front Range for people that might have barriers when it comes to transportation. And they're able to access the park with an entrance pass, but not a timed entry reservation. So we really appreciate partnerships like that really tackle some of the barriers that we have heard about that may be an issue, and continue to highlight that.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. We are getting up on time, but we do want to answer a last couple questions on process. And because process is my favorite thing, I'm going to take these last couple of questions that we have. And again, so appreciative of people hanging with us for the full length of this meeting. We had a question for those of us who are just learning about this process and are coming into it new. Can details still be added to the alternatives? Can the alternatives still be tweaked? Yeah, no final decisions have been made. We have put out these alternatives that we think meet purpose and need, and the supporting analysis. If there are additional ideas that are feasible that we should be considering, and that help us achieve the purpose and need and resolve issues, those are great things to put in comments. We definitely want to make sure that we are really thinking through this and being really thorough in what we're considering. So again, looking at new ideas, we really want to be thinking about what helps us resolve the issues that are in Chapter 1, what helps us meet the purpose and need that's in Chapter 1. Welcome those comments in addition to feedback on the analysis. Also, those of us who have been working on this document have been looking at it every day for the last couple of months. If there's an opportunity that we have to clarify something, to better describe it, we are open to that feedback. Really would love to hear how we can make sure we're being really clear about what this looks like and what the path forward looks like. And I think the other question that folks had is about how we use public comment. What do we do with these public comments? This is our third round of public comment that we're in right now on this specific thing. Folks are curious, like, how are you guys using those comments? What do we do with them? Where do they go? And so I think that one of the things that I really want to emphasize for folks is that while we have a lot of great resources, like the ability to do those virtual meetings, we don't have any kind of fancy software that goes through the public comment. So even if we receive hundreds of letters, I hope we receive hundreds of letters from people engaged in this process. someone you have heard from probably tonight is going to read all of those letters. Someone goes through, and in fact, a whole team goes through letter by letter, considers the ideas that are in them, pulls them forward into summary documents, pulls all that together for a team to consider, and we really do go through word by word through every single correspondence that we do receive. All of that gets included. When we worked on the pre-NEPA, when we worked on issues and values that Kyle talked about, we used those comments to help inform how we were thinking about the purpose and need. What was your perspective on the issues? What was those varying different viewpoints about what made a good visitor experience or what made a problematic experience really informed how we kind of even crafted those beginning tenets. We also looked at all of the suggestions on strategies from the last round and different ideas folks wanted us to consider. And I really do hope that people see themselves in the document, that they see their comments reflected, that even if it's not their exact idea or their exact comment that they've made, that all of the cumulative effort of all of that of the community rings through in that document. And with these comments that we have, again, we have a team that will be going through them, looking for those substantive comments that really ask for clarification, ways that we can improve the analysis, ways that making sure that we're considering all the ideas that help us address purpose and need. We'll be identifying concern statements for those, developing responses, and we'll be publishing that along with the final decision as we put that package together in the spring. So you can look forward to seeing that. So hopefully that was informative for everybody. Noticing that we are getting to time, want to be respectful of people's evening, and just so grateful for the amount of time that you have dedicated on a Wednesday to spend with us and to learn more about this process. So a couple of reminders that I just wanted to give for folks. We do want to hear from you. The comment period is open for 45 days, closes December 14th. The URL is there on the screen. And you're welcome to submit comments more than once. So if you have initial ideas and then you want to dig in deeper, go ahead and do that. For folks who are in Colorado, I'm sure we have people joining us from all over the country, but for those folks who are proximate to Colorado, we do have 2 in-person public meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll be in Grand Lake next week, and we'll be up in Estes Park just after Thanksgiving. The dates and times and locations for those are on the planning or on the project homepage. We can drop that into the chat for folks who need it for where to find us. Many of the people who you saw online tonight will be at those meetings. If you're available and interested, invite you to join us for those. We'll have information there similar to what we shared tonight, but the opportunity to have a conversation with anyone who's interested in joining us for those conversations. And also just wanted to say thanks for spending the time with us tonight. So with that, I think that gets me to the end of our announcements for the night. So I will invite our superintendent to join us for any parting thoughts he has before we close out the evening. I'll turn it over to you, Gary, to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rachel. Outstanding presentation by all. I want to thank everybody that joined us tonight. You're committed to improving the park and improving our process, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. I'm deeply appreciative as the new guy here to learn to what you have to say and hopefully help get a plan together that's going to be not only beneficial to you all, but you guys need to know that we're trying to do everything we can to protect this park and to make it everything that you want it to be. So thank you so much again. I wish you all the very best, and thanks for staying with us on this late evening. I wish you all a good night. Take care.